change. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book of Nehemiah in the Old Testament. This is the memoirs of Nehemiah, and it's about God interrupting somebody's life because he had something more for them than they had for themselves. And I believe there's, out of this series and out of this journey we're on right now, that God may want to interrupt some of you. Because we get into a routine of doing, whatever it is that we're doing, and then God begins to interrupt. And sometimes that interruption can be, with heartache kinds of things, or it can be a challenging thing. But Nehemiah's life was really good as a cupbearer to the king. He's got lots of perks, lots of privilege. And then God interrupts his life by making something that is his concern, meaning God's concern, and he begins to put a part of that in Nehemiah's heart. When you have a burden in your heart, when something comes across your radar screen, a lot of times it comes and goes, but then something happens where all of a sudden you get it, you see it, you feel it. And it's those times we need to tend to that. So Nehemiah is, as we looked at, he heard about what was going on in Jerusalem. He would have heard of that before. But today, when he heard from one of his brothers about the disgrace and the plight of the people in a place 100 miles away, it really bothered him. It got to him, and then he began to be overwhelmed by it. And then he began to weep. The first thing he did, as we looked at last week, is he asked. He wanted to know. Sometimes we don't want to know. Because if we want to know, we might have responsibility to get involved in circumstances or situations, either with people or around us or someone else. You know what I'm talking about. Sometimes we really would rather not know. But he cared enough to ask, and then he cared enough to really weep. Sometimes what we weep over really tells us what matters to us. And then he prayed about what he was agonizing over, and then he acted. He did something. And that's why this story, I think, is so pertinent to all of us. Because I do believe that typically God has more in store for you and me and what he wants to do in and through us than we anticipate. And we get locked into our routine and into our everyday lives, and maybe it's a rut. And then God comes and something happens to kind of snap us out of it. So that's what's happened in Nehemiah. He's got no ability to do anything about this, but he comes up with a plan. And now the question is he going to do anything about it? Is it just going to end with, he had a burden and he prayed and then nothing happens out of it? So today in chapter 2, as we find it's crunch time for Nehemiah. It's do or die, go big or go home. Let me interject something else as we enter into the story. I think for a season of our church, I think for me, and maybe for you, I wonder when the last time you asked God for big things, outrageous things, things so impossible that only God could do it. Our church was born out of that, having a dream, having a vision, not where we were, but where we could be. The people that we could reach, the things that God would do and could do. That we were praying those big dreams. And at a regional gathering for Vineyard pastors, that one of the speakers just talked about that. And I thought, I stopped asking for those big things. Well, this is a big moment for Nehemiah, because for him to step into this, it's going to cost him everything. It's going to cost him everything that he has for something that he's just got in his heart. And he's going to see what happens. So here we go. In verse 1 of chapter 2. Early the following spring, so it took some time, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, was serving the king his wine. These are the memoirs. Nehemiah is telling the story, his own story. I was serving the king his wine, which was cupbearers do that. I had never before appeared sad in his presence. So the king asked me, "Why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled." Right at the onset, something's not going according to how things typically happen here. You see, Eastern monarchs were sheltered from anything that might bring them unhappiness. If you were a cupbearer and you do anything to bring displeasure or unhappiness to the king, it means you were no longer the cupbearer and you were no longer alive. That's how life was in that. And so for Nehemiah to not cover up his sadness and his sorrow was, breaking protocol right out of the gate here. And it was risking his very life. And then another surprising thing is that the king even notices or cares. He says, oh, he's my cupbearer. Why should I care about you? Obviously, Nehemiah has served in such a way, has lived his life in such a way before the king, that the king actually cared about this servant of his. He had earned the respect in some way. Even today for Christians, sometimes it's a lost art with many believers who think we skip this step in life and family, that we want to make our demands and rather not earning things. I think we can have such an impact in the marketplace if we have a servant's heart and a servant's attitude, and all of that. And obviously, Nehemiah has done that. Now, then we get kind of on the inside. Nehemiah is bringing us in as this thing develops here. He says, then I was terrified. You ever step down into something and then you're like, what have I done? Somebody should have stopped me. I thought about when I moved to Fort Collins 36 years ago. Somebody should have said, this is crazy. Actually, I'm glad they didn't. He says, then I was terrified, but I replied, long live the king. He goes for it. He says, sometimes we let fear change the narrative, because fear is just part of life, that we all step into things and situations that we become afraid. But we sometimes let fear decide what happens next. We let fear decide our future and the future of other people around us. So Nehemiah's not doing this because he's not afraid. He's going for it for the king. He knows the risk. He knows what could happen here, that he could literally lose everything, including his own life. But then he says, I was terrified, but I replied, long live the king. Good place to start when you want to ask a big thing of the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. I like his transparency. He's not faking it. I didn't grow up in the church, but one of the things I don't enjoy is when Christians particularly fake it. When we fake faith when we don't have faith. And when we're hurting, but we say we're not hurting because we're not supposed to hurt for some stupid reason. And people around us, when they watch us faking it, they don't respect us. Are you with me here? They don't respect the faith that we do have, the life in Jesus that we have. And then our faith isn't accessible to them when we fake it and when we wear masks. Because they assume people like them that struggle, that have this and that and wonder and doubts and all the rest of it, obviously it's not for somebody like me. And so I really love that here, that he's not hiding his fear. He's writing this. He didn't say, yeah, I just went to the king and I had faith and I believed it. I just told him that what God was. None of that. In humility, and he said, I was scared to death. I was afraid. But I didn't let fear stop me from what God has put in my heart to do. I wonder if that's what we need, more of this depth of God's burden in our hearts. Well, let's go on. So the king asked, another surprise, well, how can I help you? And with a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, if it pleases the king, and if you are pleased with me, and he was, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. That's a big ask here. That is a big ask. Why should the king care about the remnant that's back in Jerusalem, since they had destroyed, that they had destroyed years before? Why should he care about what Nehemiah cares about here? But here's something that's kind of interesting. What if Nehemiah had only prayed, with that hyper-spiritual, God's going to do it. I don't know how he's going to do it, but God's going to do it. I'm just going to go to the king. And then without an expectation of the king saying yes. So when the king says, how can I help you? Nehemiah was ready because he had a plan. Somewhere today, especially charismatic type circles, there's a sense that planning is not spiritual. That just going with it and just believing God and just being reckless, that's more spiritual than having a plan. It was spiritual. God birthed this supernatural. But somewhere in the midst of this, before he went to the king, he was not going to show up empty-handed. It was like, I had no idea that you were going to say yes. I don't know. I didn't think I'd get this far. I didn't know if my head would be attached to my body right now. And so that kind of thing. Nehemiah was ready for the possibility of yes. Well, actually, King, now that you've asked, I do have a plan. Actually, I got a big plan, and I don't want to share it with you. You know, this is where I think God wants us to pray some Nehemiah-type bold prayers again. Not just prayers of survival and help, but prayers of victory, prayers of transformation, prayers of change, prayers of, asking God for miracles. And sometimes I think our issue is we're so ready to hear no that we don't even ask. You see, if Nehemiah had assumed that the answer was no, why would you go to the king and ask and just hear the words and risk your life for that? But he did what he did with the possibility that this king's going to say yes. And if the king says yes, he's ready to go. I did that for too much of my life, saying no to people by not asking. And then sometimes not saying no for God by not asking. And one of the things I encourage you to do that we can learn from Nehemiah here is don't say no for people and don't say no for God by not asking. Are you hearing that? Sometimes we don't want to hear the no, and maybe it's because we haven't heard enough yeses, and maybe people in our world growing up, it's no, 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 you can't. And I don't know. But God was so powerfully strong in Nehemiah that he says, I'm going for the yes. I'm going for the yes. I think God is asking this church to go for the yes in this season that we're in. Yes to our future. Yes to what God has for us. And that's personal for you as well, saying yes to what God has for you. Because I think God wants to do something in the world around us. So anyway, I love the fact that he refused to say no. So what happens? I love how this unfolds now. So the king with the queen sitting beside him asked, how long will you be gone? He's going for this. How long will you be gone? And when will you return? And it wasn't I don't know. No, it said, after I told him how long I would be gone, the king agreed to my request. You ever know when you're on a run of yeses, you just want to keep going till you get a no? Teenagers, you really know this one, don't you? When you get a yes from mom and dad, you don't want to stop with one. You say, well, now that you said yes to that, what about? Well, maybe I shouldn't bring that up. It's like we got some of our teenagers right here. So I also said to the king, he's on a roll. So, hey, if it pleases the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River, instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. He thought this thing through. He's assumed that God was going to was going to have the king say yes, but he realized for me to get to Jerusalem, to rebuild anything, I got to get there alive. And so he asked the king for the letters to get him there. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. He's already thought that when I get there to rebuild the gates and do all the work, I'm gonna need some wood. And so he's now asking that. He said, I will need to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls. I like this. And a house for me. A house for myself. I like this guy. I mean, he's just like, and while I'm at it, you know what? I'd like a place to live too. I'd like to get enough wood to build my own little cabin or whatever it is. And so he just keeps going. And then crazy, and the king granted these requests. All of this is outrageous. All of this is over the top. It shouldn't have happened. Wrong picture show, wrong narrative. But now we're told why. Because the gracious hand of God was on me. Nehemiah knew it wasn't about him and his preparation. Even though he had the plan, he recognized that all of this that was happening is because the Spirit of the living God was on him and had prompted him. And there was one of those times that he had to wonder, God, is this you or is this just me? You ever thought about that when you feel something or you hear something or you sense something? Well, there was no way for Nehemiah to ultimately know whether this was a God thing or just his thing until he would step into it. Now going before the king as this thing is unfolding, can you imagine? He's just thinking, wow, I can't, this is you, God, all along. You inspired this. You put this in my heart. And now you've gone before me. You've gone, before me to the king. You've changed him. You've given me favor with him. But what I think is really important is sometimes we forget where we've come from. And we think that somehow we pulled it off. Nobody comes to Christ without God using people and being active in your life. It's his work in you. He's changing you. But I love that. He says, no, wait. This is all happening because God put his hand on my life. And by the way, friends, that's all you need to know at the end of the day. It's not where you've been, what you've done, and all this. Is the hand of God on your life. And are you willing to put that into motion by taking the risk? Now he goes. Now he starts. So he said, all right, I'm out of here. We're going to go do this thing. When I came to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates, I delivered the king's letters to them so they'd leave me alone. And then I like that the king, I should add, had sent along army officers and horsemen to protect me. King loved him. Character and how you live your life does pay dividends at the end of the day before a watching world. In this case, it's a pagan world, an ungodly world, a merciless world, but he had earned something really big. And so the king says, I'll give you the letter, but you're going to need some more. You're going to need some of my men. Because he is so committed to Nehemiah. I don't think he was committed to the mission. I don't think he cared a rip. I doubt if the king cared about Jerusalem. I don't think he cared about the people there that were in disgrace and suffering. But he did care about this Nehemiah guy. He did care about him. And I think that's where it goes. Now in verse 10, when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard of my arrival, they were displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. Interesting. And these were going to be his adversaries all along the way that we're going to see in the next number of weeks. Every time God calls a man or woman to something more than themselves, you will be opposed. You will feel that pressure retreat back into your little cubicle, after your little cubby hole kind of thing, in the safety of your own life. Every time you step out from this and you believe that you can, there's going to be somebody somewhere, maybe the voice inside of you. What was I thinking? I can't do this. I shouldn't do this. I need to get back in my place. That's what God has for us or for you. I think he wants to interrupt you. Interrupt your mindset, how you're thinking and all of it. And says, I got something for you. God interrupted my life when I was in California before moving here. I had just been promoted to a new job to be a principal of a new continuation high school. And Becky was a school teacher, and we loved teaching. And we had a little church, on the side that we kept trying to get rid of. And then driving through Fort Collins, we had this burden, all of a sudden that we're supposed to move here and start a church 36 years ago. And the crazy thing about that is I came to a place where it didn't go away. And so I've got to try. I've got to see if this is a God thing. But everything around me, even voices, even my real father, who I only met a couple times, and I introduced him to Becky, tried to give me counsel not to throw away, a job like that and a future like that, and come to Colorado. I had all those things, but there's those things that will oppose you that says, stay where you are. That's all that God has for you. Nothing more is to happen. So the next thing that Nehemiah gets to Jerusalem, okay? He's there. He's on the job site, so to speak. So I arrived in Jerusalem, he says. 3 days later, I slipped out during the night, taking only a few others with me. Listen to this. I had not told anyone about the plans God had put in my heart for Jerusalem. We took no pack animals with us except the donkey I was riding. That's not usually how it works, especially with Christian leaders today, it seems. Sorry. It's like sometimes we get a word from God and it's saying, never fear, Nehemiah's here. I've heard from God. I've been to the mountain and I've come here to free you poor people up and to help you and out of your disgrace and all that. None of that's going on. He doesn't tell anybody. He's got this thing bubbling inside of him. And then he does something that Christians need to do today. He had to go now see for himself what he felt in his heart. He had to go taste what he was sensing. And so God had broken his heart. He had wept over this. He had gone to the king. And now he gets there. He says, I just got to see this devastation that I've heard about. I got to touch it. So he got his feet dirty and his hands dirty. And he walks the streets for a number of nights by himself, and God breaking his heart all the while. And something happened as he walked the streets. The plight of the people of Jerusalem, and the people of Jerusalem became a part of that. God married him. It's not you and me, it's us. And when we think about our cities, we think about our schools, we think about our nation, we think about people that are, and what's going on right now. And it's crazy, big-time stuff. We can run from it, seclude ourselves, fortress ourselves away from it all, or we can actually engage the world, engage our city, engage what's happening in our neighborhood, engage our schools, or whatever it might be. I love this part of it. He doesn't burst with this big bravado, no fear, I'm here kind of thing. And in verse 16, the city officials, grab this, did not know I had been out there or what I was doing. He didn't send the alarm. He didn't meet with the biggies, the big shots. He went low, and he went among the people to see how they were living. For I had not yet said anything to anyone about my plans. I had not yet spoken to the Jewish leaders, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or anyone else in the administration. I love that, and I think there's a great pattern for us to really understand that ministry starts from the inside, but it starts from the bottom up, not the top down. Are you with me here? It always starts this way. It always starts with people that are at the ground level, at the grassroots level, that are doing it. And then as that expands, then it grows, and then it can be a top-down reality to take it further. But anything that God does, it always starts at the grassroots level, because that's where it's real. That's where the suffering is, the pain is, and the heartache is in all of it. But now I said to them, now it's time. You know very well what trouble, listen to the word, we are in. Wow, there's a deal. Something happened on the way from Susa, from the citadel, to now Jerusalem. It became us, or we. He says, the trouble that we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. That's the fact. That's what he had heard. And then he says, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. I love it. I love it. These people had learned to live with disgrace. They had learned to live with poverty. They had learned to live in fear. They had learned to live, this is life in Jerusalem. This is it. And they could have responded, Nehemiah, we've been there, done that. We tried that. Come on. We've done all that. You're the new guy coming to town and with all these big ideas. But he doesn't come with judgment, criticism, or condemnation. He had a true prophetic word from God about what God wanted to do, but he doesn't blast the people for the plight that they were in. I see Christian leaders do that sometime, and sometimes prophetic folks, and it's like, what are you doing? God doesn't give gifts to beat God's people up for what they're not doing. God raises up prophetic people, and he gives, words of knowledge and those of what God wants to do and can do and what can be. Not to harass and berate for what's not. Are you hearing me here? I don't know where you've been, but there are a lot of circles. That's what goes down. We don't need that. Nehemiah doesn't beat him up. But he starts with, hey, you know the disgrace we are in, and let us rebuild this thing. Let's do this. And, it's almost like they hadn't even thought about it. Sometimes we need people from outside our circumstance to speak into our life, our narrative. Because we can't see. We can't see what we can't see. It's a big moment here. Tune into this. And sometimes we resent or we chafe under people, whether speaking about our marriage, or speaking about our lifestyle, or speaking about our kids. Boy, that's a big taboo. But there's sometimes we can't see what we can't see and hear what we can't hear, and we need somebody to tell us what can change, and not just to beat us up by being bad, but give me something to do better. Give me something to do different. And so some of our challenges in life is when we seal ourselves off from anybody being able to speak things that could be very helpful to us. So here's a group of people, they could have cut him off. They could have said, you know what, Nehemiah, I don't know what you're thinking and all of this stuff, but we don't need you. Life is already bad here, and we don't want you to make it worse. But he offered a sprinkle of hope. Offered just that little morsel of hope that they had none of. And something inside of these leaders that said, yeah, why not? What do we got to lose with all of this? Man, I love it. And then he says, then I told them about the gracious hand of God that had been on me, and about my conversation with the king. I'm sure he said, you know what, guys, I think God's in it. I think, I went before the king, and this happened, and that happened, and then I got here alive, and all this. I think God's with us. I think God's on his hand. His hand's on us to do this thing. So the first step was convincing the leaders about something more. And I love the fact he doesn't present himself as an outsider. I love when people come to our church and they use our church. Usually newcomers will say, your church, I like your church. Well, that's nice for about a week. But I love it when I hear people say our church. And I love when people see a need in our church, but they want to lead something. I had someone today, they've only been in our church for 2 weeks, from Minnesota, an elderly couple. And they let me know after first service today that the mission downtown here, just down the street here, they're desperate for workers right now. And I was thinking, well, how do you know that? It's because they've been volunteering since they've been here. It's like, and I said, why do you do that? I said, well, we're Vineyard people. And then that what Vineyard people do? It's like, yeah, but not like you. That's crazy good. But it was a little picture of all of this. They were telling me something needed to be done and a need, but they were doing it. It wasn't us. We need more of us over there. And I think they're only going to be here a month because they're here for a wedding. And it's just like, I like that. Sometimes you need somebody from the outside looking in. Now, on the other side, a little downside maybe, but we used to have people who would say, hey, there's not enough love around here. Boy, that kind of riled me up because I thought we're pretty loving. You've been around, it's like that kind of stuff. It's like, and I remember I had 2 responses. One I didn't give because that wouldn't have gone well. But I had a second one that I've never forgotten. It's like, you know what? I said to this person, I said, you are so right. We are so short on love around here. And but my question is, will you help us? Will you teach us how to love? That just blew this person out of the way. They had no intention of being an answer, but only pointing out a problem. And I could see that. Because it doesn't take a prophet to say, this is wrong, that's wrong, don't do this, more of this, more of that. But I really meant it. And I say it to you. When you see something that's not right, show us the right way. Do the right. Be the change. Lead the way in this. And so this couple that's just here for a month, it's really got my attention. Really got my attention. Anyway, so people in Jerusalem, they're content with their situation. And then a man with a plan comes, and all of a sudden, it's different. So they replied at once. Here we go. Yes, let's rebuild the wall. So they began the work. But when Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab, the 3 little nemesis, heard of our plan, they scoffed contemptuously out loud. What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? No, there's the threat. If that gets out, the king's going to send and it's all over. And I replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. Notice, every time you're going to see over the next number of weeks, when Nehemiah is challenged, he turns to God, not to people. He turns to God first, makes his stand, and then he moves forward. You're going to see that pattern. So it is with you. Every time you step forward in your life, you will be challenged. Now it goes up from just being displeased to now, verbally, challenging them. And he says, we are his servants and we will start rebuilding this wall, but you have no share, legal right, or historic claim in Jerusalem. He had to put off the enemy. He said, I believe God has given us a work to do, and I'm going to do it regardless of your opinion and what you say or what you're going to do. So when you say yes to God, there will always be some opposition and some doomsayers. And sometimes the doomsayer is you. Some of you are your own doomsayer because you've been playing those tapes over and over again in your own head, and when you step out, you call yourself to get back in place. And sometimes it's the loving people around us, family, people close to us. They shut it down before it even gets a chance to start. And I think God's up to something right now, in real time, right now, for you and for me and for us. So the reality check, and just summarizing this for us. God was already at work in Jerusalem. Nehemiah didn't bring God to Jerusalem. He was already there. And he was already at work. And he invited Nehemiah to join him in his work. And when God calls you to something, now hear me on this one. He's not sending you to pioneer something where he's not. He's inviting you into where he already is. He's already with the poor, the homeless, that single mom, that single dad, that suicidal person, that drug addict, that alcoholic, that whatever it is. God is already there, caring, working. And he simply does that. Come here. Come here. I want you to join me in this one. He'll put a piece of what's in his heart in you, and he'll just call you to it. If you think that you have to go and do all this, it takes you out. Same thing with our city. New West Fest. Crowded, crazy yesterday. Anybody go? And it's hot. And walking down and all these people. And I just, I hear all the time, well, we have too many people, too crowded. These are all people that God loves and put our church to connect with. God put this church, called Becky and I, 36 years ago, so we could bring God's hope to people that have no hope. People that are disconnected, that don't have access to Jesus Christ. Because of whatever reason in life, he's put our church here to help connect them to God, not for ourselves. The church of Jesus in the world today has missed something. Church does not exist for Christian self-perpetuation till we go to heaven. It's not the place to hide out or seclude. The church is meant to be his hands and feet to connect people with the love of God through Jesus Christ and give them a hope and a future if they want it. It's give them a chance. And so I'm thinking about this yesterday because of this message. I'm seeing all these people and different kinds of people. It's like, God, you're already at work in every single person here. You love them and you're at work. And you want to use me and our church and people to connect you to them. It's like, it's like I whine like anybody about traffic, but you know what? We can't whine about all the people that God is bringing to our community. Rather, let's see it as an opportunity that God is bringing people into our domain to change their life forever. I had somebody today after our early service came up. Maybe we'll share a story. She talked about coming here, about defeated, depressed, broken, addicted, and pregnant. And she said she tried 4 times to have an abortion. And God intervened in her life, and she's been coming here, and she says, my life has been changed forever. All that does is make me cry, and it's like, I got to find a way to tell these stories that God, that's worth it. That's why we're here. And some of you that are new to the Vineyard, there are other people that paid the price and did whatever that has been done to have this here for you now. And we want to do that for others. in all of that. So 3 takeaways real quick. Pray and tune into what God is doing and join with him in that. I was trying to tune in yesterday for a change instead of just the heat and the crowd and looking at all the people. I said, these are people I want to see in my church. I want them to see it in our church. God, help us. God, you love these people. But it's tuning in to recognizing that this is going on. The second piece is to look for opportunities to come alongside and connect the dots for people. God did that for you. There's time, it was because God's already working, but they might not understand. Ethiopian eunuch reading out of Isaiah. And he's reading this and it's like, I get it, I don't get it. And then God translates Philip, not translates, moves him from one place to another. Is that what translate? Move you from? Sounds like, first word. So Philip shows up, he's listening to what he's doing, and then he comes alongside, and all Philip does is connect the dots of what God is already doing. And that means we listen to people. We listen to their plight. We listen to their pain, and then we pray for them. Can I pray for you? Can I serve you? Can I help you? And we enter in on the low side with that. But it's recognizing you don't start anything. God is already at work. And lastly, what Nehemiah-sized prayers do you need to pray? What's on tap for you? What Nehemiah-sized prayers have you stopped praying? And when did you stop praying? Let's stand.